I don't see the YouTube live yet. And welcome to Ephemera. I am fantasy author Katie Brisky.
And I am editor Jen R. Albert. We hope you're enjoying our theme music courtesy of Alex White. Welcome to anyone joining us for the first time, and welcome back to those of you who have visited our virtual home before. For those who are new, Ephemera is an award-nominated reading series chaired by Katie and myself.
Pre-COVID, we held events in the Glad Day bookshop, and while we await our triumphant return, we are absolutely enchanted to be with you all right here on YouTube. And we would like to begin tonight by acknowledging that the land on which I live and work is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. This land is covered under Treaty 13 and is part of the Dish with One Spoon.
And the land on which I live and work is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas, and is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. Additionally, this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation.
And in thinking about tonight's theme, I think sometimes despair can cast a sort of spell. I will admit to bouts of despair thinking about the toxic relationship between late-stage capitalism and the land. The UN's IPCC's report on climate change rings the urgency of an alarm bell. The land is at a tipping point, and the land is not okay. And if things do not change very drastically, the land will rapidly become inhospitable to most life. Pricking your finger on the spindle of that report, it's easy to sink into nihilistic somnolence. We're doomed anyway, so what does it matter? But we don't have time to sleep. We need to act, eyes wide open. The relationship between humans and the land isn't inherently antagonistic. We know that, we've seen that. Certainly, this land from where I speak has been home to Indigenous peoples for over 15,000 years and counting. And yet Indigenous communities are one of the groups most impacted by climate change. I'm also reminded of enchantments where people merrily drink muddy water, believing it's wine, or dance in a bramble patch, convinced it's a golden palace. Despair-driven apathy isn't the answer, but neither is starry-eyed optimism. We can't like and retweet our way out of this. Broken relationships, whether they're with the land or with people and communities, need more than words and empty gestures for repair. They need concrete, lasting changes, understanding and ownership of the harm done, and a commitment to change that is carried out every day. The IPCC report acknowledges the importance of Indigenous knowledge to mitigating the impacts of climate change, but there's justified fear that sharing knowledge with settlers could lead to further exploitation of peoples in the land, as has happened before. So what's the answer? What's the answer when the world is burning and oppressive regimes are returning while Western powers watch? And I couldn't find the most recent number of graves uncovered at former residential school sites because the media moved on. Listening, boosting, making whatever concrete disruptive change you can in your community, on your land, and in yourself. After all, in every story I've ever read, enchantments are always broken.
A reminder to everyone that our code of conduct is posted online. If this is your first event, please check it out on Twitter or Facebook. If you're so inclined, you can still feed Fred the physically distanced donation dragon. You can find our Ko-fi link at the top of our channel near our banner on our Twitter or on our Facebook for tonight's event as well. It's ko-fi.com/ephemera reading series.
So, what's new?
Voting for the Aurora Awards is open. You can vote for many past readers and performers, as well as Ephemera itself, in Best Fan-Related category.
Note that category change. And do note that voting closes on September the 4th.
Also, I saw the Swamp Hag earlier. She seemed really, really pleased with herself, like even more than usual.
She does generally seem to be living her best life. I actually quite admire that.
But she also said something about having a secret put into a magical object.
A secret? Well, that is very intriguing. And I can't wait to learn more. But before we fall under the spell of this mystery, allow me to introduce our first reader tonight, Samantha Garner. Samantha Gunner's debut novel, The Quiet is Loud, was published by Invisible Publishing in May 2021. Her short fiction and poetry have previously appeared in Broken Pencil, Sundog Lit, Kiss Machine, The Fiddlehead, Storycord, Whiskey Paper, and The Quarantine Review. She lives and writes in Mississauga. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you very much, Katie and Jen, for having me. This is very exciting and I'm happy to be here. I'm hopefully will set the stage for some enchantments tonight. I'll be reading, as Katie said, from my book, The Quiet is Loud. I just always have to show this because the cover, I'm still not over this cover. It's just gorgeous, I think. So so the passage I'm going to read, I don't think will need a lot of explanation, but I will mention that content-wise, there is one instance of strong language. And for context, I'm going to be using the word Vecker, which in this world is a derogatory term for someone who has enhanced mental abilities. And the main character in the story, Freya, is one such person. Hours after lunch, Freya still couldn't relax. She tried to read, but the words swam together in her brain. She considered calling Mary, but she didn't even know what she'd say. She'd seen a Vecker out of control in the world, in exactly the way people feared, and had watched people run, heard them scream on the sidewalks. It was terrifying. What would happen to the man? What if it had been her instead? Freya put on her shoes and jacket and slipped outside. It was early evening, but already getting dark, and for a moment she felt a little glimmer of pleasure at the thought of taking a long walk. She could leave the annex, maybe walk north and see where she ended up. Suddenly, anxiety gripped her. No, too far north and she would be close to the restaurant. Too close for comfort. What if she saw someone who recognized her? She never wanted a reminder of today ever again. The Spadina streetcar screamed on its rails. She returned home with takeout pierogies from Futures and opened a bottle of wine she'd been saving. Best to stay home in a nest of blankets on her bed, laptop propped up, stack of DVDs wobbling precariously on the uneven nightstand she'd found at the end of her street last summer. Start with the classics. Maybe they'll be boring and relaxing. Breathless, Breakfast at Tiffany's. Oh, wait. Mickey Rooney playing that racist Japanese caricature. Okay, a bit more modern. Can't go wrong with some Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Stay away from 16 Candles, though, another racist Asian character. Should probably just throw those movies away. Fuck it, put on the Lord of the Rings trilogy and stop thinking about movies. Just throw the dinner stuff on the counter, ignore the clock, curl up and let the world slide away. Imagine a world more fantastical, where people with weird abilities are respected, spoken of reverently in hushed tones, are made members of important councils that make important decisions using unique insights that regular people simply don't have, where people like me would go on adventures, quests that could change the world. Where could she go to escape on a quest of her own? Maybe the Philippines, the one she knew through her father's stories. Humid and hot, land of mythological creatures. Maybe she could meet a real Nuna Sapunso, gain its trust. Or maybe tame Dad's favorite, the half-horse trickster Tikbalang. Or maybe she could go to Norway. The cold wind, the northern lights, the crackling quiet, the land of her mother and her name and her power. She shifted her legs, felt the air around her change, grow hotter, and then colder. How long had she not been alone? The shadowy figure in the corner of her small apartment filled her with dread, but also a strange comfort, a sense of inevitability. The stale taste of red wine gummed her mouth shut as she tried to greet it, but a greeting wasn't necessary. The shadows shifted as it moved, changed size. It turned from a half-horse creature into a tiny old man, his long beard trailing on the floor as he moved closer to Freya, using a strange, crouching hop. The Nuna touched Freya's wrist, and she knew she had been cursed. The imprint of his hand flared, and then he was gone. Freya tried to move, talk, anything, but she was frozen, curled around her dead laptop, her useless books, the detritus of her waking life. She wrenched her eyes toward the window, willing her heart to slow. Why was her window so big? Why were her curtains wide open? Falcons soared across her vision, a cloak drawn across the moon, a glittering chariot pulled by two cats. They'd burned the goddess Freya 3 times, she remembered. And it was the cause of a war so endless that everyone just got tired of fighting. Freya banished to the wrong side forever. She couldn't wake up. The night so long that she saw every Vanir, every Aesir, learned all of their faces. A dream so long that she saw every Nuna Sapunso and every mound of earth, learn their names and their histories. She wondered if she had become a Manananggal, separated from her lower body, flying forever in a desperate attempt to rejoin herself before she was burned by the sun. But when the sun finally rose, Freya welcomed the fire, welcomed the release from the endless night. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
I miss futures. Oh, that was really cool. I love the juxtaposition of different mythologies and tones and voices. It definitely had me under a spell. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
And I'm also rather enchanted by this idea of a secret from the swamp hag. Did she say anything else?
She said she put the secret into an enchanted object, and to get it out, she said, we will need to use all of our wits and some kind of spell. I bet we can do that together.
Possibly related. While Samantha was reading, the swamp hag dropped 3 objects off at my door. She dropped off this spooky silver bell and also this book, which is obviously cursed, I think. And also, she dropped off this doll that I love.
Yeah. To be honest, they all look a little cursed.
Her name is Louise, and she is very important to me.
Well, let's see if we can disenchant one of these objects anyway and get the swamp hag's secret. Which one should we try to disenchant? The book, the bell, or the doll?
You can vote in the chat. I have all 3. You can vote in the YouTube chat or on Twitter, and I'm sure all of these objects are equally great and not cursed. Especially not this one.
Okay. In the meantime, Margo McDonald is a multi-award-winning playwright and performer who primarily creates shows which highlight queer women's history and stories. Most recently, she developed and performed in Dress as People, a triptych of uncanny abduction. Was awesome. Written by Kelly Robson, Amal El Motar, and A.M. Delamonica. When she's not performing or writing, she's working as a storyteller and a researcher for The Haunted Walk, which helps feed her love of all things spooky. Find her at www.perryrepost.ca. Oh, and there's a content warning in this one for violent deaths and for ghosts.
Hello, everyone. Oh, that worked, I think. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be invited here tonight to share some ghost stories with you. As Jen said, I am a theater performer and playwright for the most part, but not a lot of people know that the other job and the other thing I do out in the world is that I tell ghost stories for a living. I research ghost stories, and I gotta say, KT, all of those three objects look extremely haunted to me, so be careful. I started out with the haunted walks a very long time ago. In my very first summer with them, I had my very first and perhaps most striking paranormal experience. I was helping to close up a building in Ottawa. That's where I'm from, though I'm living in Toronto now. I do ghost tours for the company in both. And this museum, the Bytown Museum, known to be very haunted. And we had just been through the entire building. We knew that it was completely empty, but we decided it was time to go. And the founder of Haunted Walks, whose name is Glenn, was walking ahead of me, and there were two other people behind me. And we headed towards the stairs and suddenly froze as we began to hear the sound of heavy footsteps following up the stairs towards us, only there was no one there. We tried to find some sort of other explanation. Maybe it was an echo from the other people above us and so on. And when we couldn't, we thought, well, let's just get out of the building as quickly as possible. So we went running down to the main floor, and Glenn went off over into the corner where the alarm pad was so that he could punch in the code. And the other three of us stood just inside the front door. And Glenn said, okay, I'm going to set the alarm. And we all went quiet. And as soon as we all were quiet, I clearly and undeniably heard the sound of footsteps walking across the empty floor above our heads, kind of generally coming towards our direction, a very undeniable sound of heavy booted feet walking across a wooden floor. Now, knowing that footsteps are one of the most reported activities of spookiness in the building, I thought, surely this is just my imagination. Please just be my imagination. I decide I'll take a peek at the other two who are standing next to me and see if there's any sign that they heard anything. And I look over only to find that they are staring up at the ceiling like this. And then we look at each other and we're wondering what we should do. And then all of a sudden from over in the corner where Glenn is, and we couldn't quite see him because there's a big pillar in the middle of the room between us, but we hear him say, hey, did you all see that? We were like, see what? We ran out of the building as quickly as possible. And poor Glenn was left frozen in place. And he was calling out, no, don't leave me. You can't leave me here alone. And he was so scared he couldn't move. I ran back in and got him outside. And of course, when we calmed down and to talk about it, we realized Glenn had not had the same experience that we had had. The three of us standing inside the front door had heard the exact same sound of these footsteps, but Glenn had not heard that sound, probably only because he was far too distracted by the sight of the solid wood sliding door in front of him, which he had just closed himself, beginning to shake like this, and then faster and faster, just as if there was someone on the other side pushing at it. But as I say, we know for certain there was no one left in the building hiding or playing tricks. And also, after setting the alarm, the motion detective system in the building, which would show that someone had been there hiding, well, it didn't go off that entire night. But although that's one of my personal experiences, I do have many favorite classic ghost stories from across Canada. And I'm just going to share, hopefully, two of them with you tonight if I don't run out of time. But one of them is one of my favorites from the city I moved to a few years ago, Toronto. And it takes place at the University College of the University of Toronto. I know that's confusing, but one of the colleges in the campus of the University of Toronto is called University College. And it's quite old. It was built in the 1860s, entirely of stone. And it really is this old, imposing building with this huge tower that goes up the middle of it. Well, this story actually takes place way back in the late 1800s, in the 1890s. And there was a young student, Alan Aylesworth, who's walking back to his dorm from the library after studying very late on a freezing cold winter night. And as he was passing by the front of University College, he saw that there was a large bearded man sitting and kind of shivering on the front steps of University College. They fell into a bit of chat, and it ended up with Alan Aylesworth asking this man, who said his name was Ivan Reznikov, that he was a Russian. He invited him back to his rooms to have a stiff drink and to warm up by the fire before heading back out into the cold. And so they got back to Alan Aylesworth's rooms, and he poured his visitor, Ivan, a glass of whiskey and one for himself. And they sat there chatting when suddenly Ivan said, "I'm very glad that I ran into you tonight. You see, I need to tell you the story of how I was murdered here exactly 30 years ago tonight." Well, of course, Alan Aylesworth was very taken back by this. He looked how much he had had to drink, but he just sat there in silence as Ivan began to tell his story. He said he'd come over from Russia as he was a stonemason, and he got work helping to build the beautiful University College. And there he quickly became fast friends with a man from Greece whose name was Paul. The two of them both were stonemasons. They worked side by side. And sure enough, soon Ivan felt that it was time that he introduced Paul to his lovely fiancée. But after introducing his lovely fiancée to Paul, Ivan began to get a little jealous. He began to think they were getting on well. In fact, he thought they were getting on too well. And so he started following them one day. He followed them for a couple of days and didn't see anything out of the ordinary. But then one day, the third day that he followed them, there they were sitting on a bench near University College, and he saw they were holding hands. He immediately ran to the work site, where he grabbed a really big knife and a very sharp axe, and he chased towards Paul. As soon as Paul saw this large bearded man running with these weapons in his hands, he fled and he ran towards the door of the University College. Ivan was chasing after him with the weapons in his hands. He got there to the door. Paul was desperately pulling on the door, trying to get inside, when Ivan threw the axe at his head. Paul ducked just in time, and the axe became embedded in the door behind him. In fact, you can still see the mark from the embedded axe in the door that's still on University College today. Well, Paul flung the door open. He ran up the stairs, went all the way to the top of the tower, and hid. Ivan followed after him the whole time. When he got to the top of the tower, he looked around with the knife in his hand, desperately, "Where is that man? Where is that man?" But he couldn't see him anywhere. Finally, he looked over the edge, and just as he did, Paul came up behind him and pushed him. He fell over the edge of the tower, all the way to the ground, and he died in the fall. Then, he said, Paul ran down, buried Ivan's body very quickly in the work site around the tower. He disappeared, and Paul said, well, he had just gone back to Russia. And so as soon as he finished telling the story of his terrible murder to Alan Aylesworth, Alan looked away to say that that's the worst story I've ever heard. And when he looked back, Ivan had vanished, leaving only behind a half-consumed glass of whiskey. Now, perhaps Alan was a bit too quick to tell his encounter to his fellow students, because they all thought perhaps he'd been studying a bit too late and a bit too hard. But he actually was so convinced by this experience that he had that he searched through the university records, and sure enough, there he found a photograph of the stonemasons who had worked on the college. And there was a man named Paul and a man named Ivan, and he had a big beard. And that was satisfying enough for Alan. But later that year, on St. Valentine's Day, in fact, somebody walking through University College with a kerosene lantern actually slipped, and the lantern fell from his hand. It set the college on fire, and the part that burned to the ground and toppled as it did was the tower. In the reconstruction work, when they started digging around the base of the tower, they found some human remains, along with a belt buckle Perhaps they were the remains of Ivan Reznikov. Now, I think I may be almost out of time. Do I have time for one really quick story? Or, yes, I have 2 minutes. Yeah, 2 minutes. All right. Well, this is a story of Lord Dufferin's brush with death, one of my favorites. Lord Dufferin was one of the Governor Generals of Canada back in the 1870s. And although he was living and working in Ottawa, he actually had gone back home to Ireland to his family estate where he was going to have a vacation and finally relax. Well, one night after several nights there, he woke up in the middle of the night to hear this strange sound coming out from his window down in the garden below. He heard this heavy scraping sound and the sound of a chain. He got up and opened his bedroom curtains, looked down out onto the back garden, and there he saw the dark figure of a man dragging a long, heavy box on a big chain behind him. The box, he said, was the exact shape and size as a coffin. And as Lord Dufferin looked down at this man, the man seemed to know that he was there because he suddenly turned and looked up at him, staring him directly in the eye. Now, in fright, Lord Dufferin let go the curtains and jumped back. He said something about the sight of this man, although he was quite ordinary looking, just filled him with absolute terror. When he went back to look, the man had vanished along with the box, but being the lord of the manor, he called for his servants and sent them down out into the garden to see if anyone was there. And they also found no trace, but Lord Dufferin was absolutely convinced that he had seen this. He felt it was some sort of warning, but he didn't know quite what. A few years later, he was attending a conference at the Grand Hotel in Paris on behalf of Canada. He had his personal assistant by his side. They crossed the lobby to get onto the elevator. When the doors were opened, they saw the elevator was already very crowded, but they stepped on, and Lord Dufferin smiled and nodded at everyone, saying hello. And then he turned to greet the elevator attendant and froze in terror. As he saw it was the exact same man he had seen in that vision in his garden so many years ago in Ireland. Well, shooting through with terror, he grabbed his aide by the arm, pulling him off the elevator with him just as the doors slammed shut. The elevator then rose up to the 5th floor, where it suddenly stopped. A moment later, the cable of the elevator car snapped, and the car went crashing to the bottom of the shaft. Nearly every person on board that very crowded elevator died, and among the bodies of the dead was the elevator attendant, of whom nothing was known, as he had only started his job there that very day. Thank you for letting me share some spooky stories with you.
Oh, thank you for sharing them with us. Just had chills running up and down the whole time. I've seen the mark in the door at University College.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite noticeable for sure. Like, you don't even have to look very hard. It's there.
It's right there.
Oh my gosh.
Almost like someone threw an axe right at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, what's going on? What's new?
We are trying to figure out which object is the one we are trying to disenchant. And it looks like...
It's going to be the doll. Okay.
Hey.
Yeah, look, she's so happy. Okay, great. But what do we do now?
Well, to disenchant objects, you usually need special ingredients. That's consistent world building, right?
Yeah, sure. We're not making that up as we go. Ingredients like bones, I'm sure, and wormwood.
Yeah, like those. Or like, since we live in the internet age, we'll just say everybody in chat put into chat the last thing you ate and then the closest object to your left. And I think given the people that watch this show, we'll get some really good stuff there.
Yeah, and you can also tell us on Twitter. And while we're all doing that, I'm very pleased to introduce our next reader. Charles Pisaur is an avid reader, writer, and reviewer of speculative fiction. His works have appeared in The Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, Lightspeed Magazine, and Beneath Ceaseless Skies, among others. His short fiction collection, The Burning Day and Other Strange Stories, is out from Lethe Press, and his editorial debut, We're Here, The Best Queer Speculative Fiction 2020, is forthcoming from the Hemlock Press later this month. He currently resides in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, with his herd of disobedient pets and his husband, Matt. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks for having me.
You are free to go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Spotlight's all yours, my friend.
The story that I'll be reading from today is The Sloppy Mathematics of Half Ghost. I will not be reading the whole thing. I'm hoping to get to two sections, the beginning and one later on. So I will jump right into it. Aboard the ghost ship 9 Lives, there are the living, the dead, and a great many cats. And Jourdain, who likes to sleep in the observation nest, body caught somewhere between ship and stars, between everything. He half sleeps and half dreams of a city he can almost taste smog and sweat and endless streets alive with celebration. Then, with a shiver he's not felt since he was beaten to death behind the theater 10 years ago, knowledge crawls up his spine and into his half-conscious mind. Napoleon is dead, he whispers, and as if the words are a spell, they send the cats nestled around his legs and over his lap, scurrying away into the rest of the ship. One pirate, a tux with a black patch over his right eye, turns back briefly, balanced weightlessly at the edge of the nest, and hisses before dropping out of view. Napoleon is dead, he says again, and this time he feels something in his chest, a swelling of emotion, joy and anger and fear, and he springs up and over the edge, barely catching the ladder as he half climbs, half falls down to the deck. Around him, the sea of stars shines, the 9 Lives cutting a path through the black, aimed at nowhere in particular, and getting there leisurely. On the deck, the living go about their tasks with calm efficiency, lost to the rhythm of sailing the still void, and the dead stand in circles playing hacky sack. Jourdain slips among them, careful not to disrupt their work or games. Being half-ghost means he borders all their worlds without fully belonging. He makes for the wheel in the peacock-bright uniform of Captain Mary. "Sees an orgy of cheese all to do today," she says when he glides to a stop beside her, always somehow aware of his presence, regardless of how quiet he is. "See anything interesting up top?" "Napoleon is dead," he says again, and the words with each speaking becoming something new and dangerous. Mary sucks in a breath like she's sprung a leak, then turns the wheel hard. The ship banks, the living out on the deck, swaying and shouting their alarm, the dead cursing the louder as the hacky sacks strike the deck, or worse, go sailing off into the sea. "Isn't that a right fig of a thing to happen?" Mary cries as the ship lurches, splashes a void like cold oil spraying the deck. "Now let's see, let me think. Where in the freeze-dried hell was that planet again?" It's all Jourdain can do to keep his feet under him, and he's spared answering anyways. Nebula, a prissy Siamese, probably more interested in a steady perch than in helping, leaps onto Captain Mary's shoulder and purrs something into her ear. "Right," Mary shouts, wrenching the wheel the other way now, and Jourdain resigns himself to sprawling ass over eyeballs onto the wood of the deck. 3 left on Centauri, the color of stale urine. The ship is straining so hard it sounds like the wood will splinter and leave them all to drown in the void. But even as their course moves in line with their new destination, 2 galleons, flying naught but naked poles, appear from the warp with a flash like lightning dead ahead, one scorched and shuddering, and the other, now close as spit and banking hard away from 9 Lives to avoid a collision. "Now we're somewhere bound," Mary shouts, cackling at the chaos. From the deck, Jourdain can make out the sneers on the other ship's crew. They've arrived too close, flogging the rules of proper sailing like it was getting off on the rough. It's turning opposite 9 Lives, though, pulling alongside. The hull's now so close a person could jump across, and someone does. Jourdain sees skirts fluttering, bare feet pumping air. All along the other ship, their crew is armed and carnivorous, eyes glued to the figure making mockery of the thought of falling to the void between ships, between stars, between life and death, and something even worse. And then they're landing, stumbling as momentum takes them all the way to the space above Jourdain before they stop. "Hi," they say, nodding, eyes gold skin, burnt umber, hands clutching the monarch of all pissed off Maine Coons. Jourdain opens his mouth, almost but not quite managing words, heart hammering his chest like it has something to prove. Cannon fire rends the moment, splinters of 9 Lives peppering the deck, untold damage below, but not so much that when Captain Mary screams for Weft, the ship doesn't shudder, the wake intense enough to lift the parallel ship, hull over mass and lost to the void. And they're away, weaving the warp of the universe, somewhere bound, that somewhere the home world, the seat of the emperor of all things, Louis Napoleon III and a half, who is dead, 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 and so full of wishes Jourdain can taste them, half and everything away. It's a race, and the prize is anything your heart desires. Well, anything that the emperor decides you're allowed to desire. Jourdain remembers and fits and starts, the awe of standing near the throne, seeing the world drop away over a horizon as distant as dreams, remembers a hand on his shoulder, whispers of seductive nothings in his ear, touches trailing lower and lower. It's like he's hearing those whispers again now, the promise of something that he hopes this time won't end with his body broken and alone. He's not sure if others are hearing the same whispers, the same pull towards homeworld. He is sure that once the news breaks, the warp will bulge with traffic as every ghost ship aims itself in the same direction. For the emperor is dead, and only a ghost ship can ferry him to his final rest, to the heart of the universe, the eternal reward that opens only to the powered will of a dead emperor. And for the crew that carries him to his final rest, a single wish each, bound by ancient law and the fickle interpretations of the emperor, yes, but enough to make a person rich beyond measure or answer the desperate yearning of a half-dead heart. And they lost 3 crew and a handful of ghosts through the hole in the hull. Jourdain stares through it as it slowly repairs, wiped away by the sandpaper tongues of a dozen cats. You say you can sail, Captain Mary asks the new arrival, who has introduced himself as Barry Zan, short for Tiberius, short for none of your fleece-soft business. And you're running? Running is a destination aboard 9 Lives, and they're all of them getting there at different speeds. Barry shrugs and bends to scoop up the Maine Coon rubbing at their legs, who has been introduced as Butler, full stop. I've been sailing since I got shot dead 10 years ago, as he says, and Jourdain can feel a piece of himself resound like a struck bell to hear it. You're a half ghost, Mary says, and spits out the hole. That why those ships were keen on you? She says, did they want you for parts? Or maybe, how long's it been since you slept? Or even, you poor, poor bastard. But Barry just shrugs again. Action automatic is sin. They're part of the flagless of sleep, Z says. And Z means, that's all I need to say, because it is. Everyone knows the flagless sleep. Void-eyed doomsayers who believe the universe a tapestry every ghost ship out wefting is marring the perfection of. They follow a master weaver who preaches there's a pattern meant to be followed through the warp that will somehow allow them to transcend to a higher plane. But first, they must wipe it clean of the clutter ghost ships have introduced, which incidentally means wiping it clean of ghost ships as well. And the cat, Mary asks, gesturing toward Butler, ended up on board by mistake, like me. And like me, didn't much care for it. We helped each other out. Yeah, I'm going to skip to a section a little later on in the story, toward the end, but not quite. It's not a secret what makes a half. Take it in stages. First, die. Shot, beaten, stabbed, dropped into a void to slowly starve or dehydrate or freeze or what. Doesn't matter, but death comes first. Second, then not. There's just waking up, and it's like a hole has been plugged inside. Like this new being is a ship half full of void, but mended, never able to bail themselves out. Third, look down. Notice the cat sitting there, tongue rough on new skin. Pick up the cat. Now 1 life lighter for having given to a probably unworthy, but at least now warm and yielding human. The conversion is not perfect. 1 cat life doesn't equal a full human one, but it's something. The sloppy mathematics of half ghosts. Fourth, pet the cat. Thank you.
Thank you. I like that there's a cat. My cat Guinness would approve. Very much. That was wonderful. Also, I love just the rhythm in that. I felt like you could have set that to music. Thank you so much thank you so much for sharing with us. And now, what magic ingredients did we come up with to follow that enchanting story?
Ooh, cashew, chicken finger, pillow, window, all kinds of stuff. Anything from Twitter?
Yeah, rice and pillows, granola bar and a glass of vino verde. I think we can use that. A brownie and a paper with scribbles.
I got a pizza and a dinner plate. Sorry, putting everything
Pierogies.
in.
And Christina has her husband Rob next to her. I think we can definitely use him. Pizza and a treadmill. Blackberry juice and a trumpet vine. Cucumber and a book. I mean, I had chicken and also the bell, so we're going to use that, I guess. Yeah, that's great. Good work, team.
I think we got it. The last thing we need is magic words, of course. Wait, I just remembered something. The swamp hag did say backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. I've got ephemera all backwards.
Ephemera backwards? What a mysterious phrase. A clue, perchance. Mayhap, the clue to our disenchanting word. We'll have to let you figure that out in the chat or on Twitter.
Can you do it? Well, while you do it, it is my great pleasure to introduce our final reader tonight. Nghi Vo was born in central Illinois, and she retains a healthy respect of and love for corn mazes, scarecrows, and 50-year floods. Nghi became a writer because while there were alternatives, none of them suited her, as well as a lifestyle of endless research combined with simply making it up when nothing else would serve. Welcome, Nghi. Everyone. There.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So The Chosen and the Beautiful is my debut novel, a queer and magical retelling of The Great Gatsby from the point of view of a Vietnamese-American Jordan Baker. One of the biggest impressions that The Great Gatsby made on me when I first read it as a teen was the magical nature of the 20s, when everything became newly possible for an America just emerging from the shadow of the First World War and a global pandemic all its own. It manages to feel very modern at a remove of even a century, but this wasn't always the case. During the 30s, The Great Gatsby was actually reckoned something of a failure. No one was in the mood for stories of spoiled socialites and car crashes during an era of breadlines. It wasn't until the 40s, after the Second World War, when Gatsby attained its status as the American classic. By that point, it was nostalgia and wonder, nearly magical in its evocation of the storied past, which is basically how I feel about parties. I'm not fond when I can go, but when I can't, they sound like the best, don't they? In this selection, Jordan takes a break from the glamour of Jay Gatsby's parties to explore magic and enchantment of a more personal nature. I was just beginning to wonder if I should find a quiet ledge to play gargoyle when I came around a corner in the garden and nearly had my head taken off by a dragon. Despite my earlier jaded thoughts, there was a moment when a rush of wind pulled my clothes awry, when I stared after a flash of light over gold scales, that I forgot everything except a startled wonder. For a moment, I thought some exotic bird had made its escape from the trees, but then I saw the dragon for itself, larger than a horse, long and slender as a lamppost. It was a dragon. I knew that, even if it was like no dragon I'd ever seen in the fairy tale books. The head recalled the wickedly blunt heads of the crocodiles I had seen at the menagerie, while a pair of deer's horns sprouted from its brow. The tail was the vast majority of the length, corkscrewing and curling as the dragon seemed to swim through the air, cat-like paws reaching out, toes extended for purchase. The golden dragon twisted around to dance over my head, and I clapped at the display of skill and delicacy. It was a marvelous thing, one more wonder to add to Gatsby's list, but then the dragon pointed its nose at the night sky above me and started twisting its way up, the tip of its tail weaving back and forth like a counterbalance. I stood staring after it, craning my neck back, and I saw the moment when it started to drop. First it was flying, then it was falling, and then it was doing some combination of the two and gaining speed as it did so. The moment that I realized it wasn't going to stop was the same moment when I realized I couldn't do much more than stumble back, likely falling on my rear as I did so. I had had cruel tricks like that played on me before, and I narrowed my eyes at the diving dragon. I wasn't going to be bullied, and that was why I did quite a silly thing looking back. The dragon could have been anything. It could have been a clockwork wonder taken from a German workshop after the war, and it could have left scars in my arm from jagged metalwork teeth. It could have been a slight and narrow aerialist in some kind of enchantment with more daring than sense. It could have been a dozen and one other things that would have utterly ruined my night, but in the end, it wasn't. Instead, it was paper, and I brought the blade of my hand up in an instinctive motion that let the dragon shear in half from nose to tail. The ripping sound making goosebumps stand up from my skin, and a prickle of something almost achingly familiar running up my spine. I stood there in surprise as the two halves of the dragon, nothing but paper intricately cut and scrolled, drifted down to either side of me, and a delighted laugh rang out behind me. Rotten brat, that took 2 hours to make. I turned to meet the speaker with my chin up and my shoulders back, nearly losing my poise with surprise when I recognized him. He was the boy in the gallery the day that Gatsby had shown us his treasure house. Now he was dressed in a black skull cap and a red brocade robe covered all over with dragons, though I saw after a moment ones that were very different from the one that had flown at me with such aggression. A long black beard, neatly combed, had been attached to his chin with spirit gum, and a pair of green spectacles obscured his eyes. I shouldn't have been able to recognize him at all, but I did, and I felt at once that sense of attraction and repulsion again. If it took so long to make, then you shouldn't have sicked it on me, I retorted. He shrugged, unrepentant, folding his hands in his sleeves like a mandarin from the picture books. I can make another, he said. I'm Kai. I crossed my arms over my chest, looking him over as he looked me over. Jordan Baker, I responded. Have you been here all month? Something like that, he said. The troupe performed here just a few days ago before you caught me. They were moving on to Philadelphia, and I don't get on in Philadelphia, so I decided to stay until they came back. Just found yourself a guest room and pretended you had been invited, I asked, and he gave me a curious look. What's the matter? What's it matter to you? You're one of Mrs. Chow's girls, aren't you? I heard she got some girls from Vietnam. A dull heat came up on my face, and I felt as if my spine were turning to clear, cold ice. I'm not one of Mrs. Chow's girls at all, I bit out. He gave me another look up and down, speculative and curious. I realized that he thought my dress was a costume, just as much as his own outfit was. He thought there was another world that I lived in, like the one where he dressed in gray slacks, striped shirts, and braces. For a moment, I wondered what he imagined I wore in that other world, and I almost choked. Hey, he started, but I was turning away. I decided I was bored, and he was tiresome. Hey, wait, he said, grabbing me by the arm. Wait, I'm sorry. Good. Here, let me make it up to you. You got yay, right? I had no idea what the words meant, and they felt like rocks dropped in the middle of his otherwise perfect English. Still, they made me choke a little. I couldn't have heard words like that since I started walking. I wasn't supposed to hear them at Gatsby's party. I stood as still and straight as a garden trellis, and Kai must have taken that to mean that I cared what he had to say, because from his sleeves, he pulled out an elegant pair of shears and what looked like a thick piece of gold paper. All right, are you looking? He waited until I nodded, and he started to cut, the shears moving so quickly they seemed to blur, throwing scraps of paper everywhere like a tiny blizzard. Something about the snick of the blade snipping through the thick cardstock sent a chill up the back of my neck, made me want to hug myself for warmth even on the hot August night. I felt exposed, I realized. I had done what he was doing twice, once in my bedroom, once in Daisy's, and he was doing it for fun, in front of God and Gatsby's guests and everyone. I started to tell him to stop, that I wasn't going to be impressed, but then the shears disappeared and he was plucking at the edge of the cardstock. With a single flick of his fingers, there was a bright orange chrysanthemum blossom in his hand, flecked with gold as the paper had been. He spun it in the air, and before it had reached the top of its arc, there was another one in his hand, red this time, and up it went as well. In a moment, I was standing in a shower of flowers, and despite my reluctance, I looked around in wonder at the shower of red and white and orange and violet falling down around me, brushing my arms, my cheeks, and my shoulders. At the end, Kai held a pure white chrysanthemum edged with gold around each narrow petal between his fingers and presented it to me. I took it without smiling, but I brought it up to my face anyway, curious. I was disappointed when there was no scent. Of course there's no smell, he told me. It's only paper, after all. It feels real, though, I said, plucking some of the petals and crushing them to a wet pulp between my fingers. Well, of course it's real, he said with a hopeful smile. It's just real and made of paper.
Oh,
Well,
woo. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I love all of the imagery and honestly just a masterwork in character and dialogue in that scene. Thank you so much. I will also say you can actually pick up The Chosen and the Beautiful from our friends at Glad Day Bookshop. I know, because that's where I got mine. Cool. I think we're almost ready to disenchant our magic object.
oh yes, our magic doll object.
Yes.
Do we have all the ingredients the team gathered?
Yes, we even got some more. We got cherries and a cat to add to the pile. And a chihuahua.
What is the magic word?
According to our brilliant team, the magic word is Aranepe.
Okay.
I don't think anything happened though.
Okay.
Aranepe. Nope, didn't work.
Okay. Oh wait, it spoke to me. It said, oh wait, maybe we should try shouting it together first.
Maybe we should try shouting it together.
I missed that.
Yeah.
Now that all of our guests are here with us on the screen, we can all shout it together.
On the count of
On the
three.
count of three.
1, 2,
Two.
3.
Aramepe!
Oh my goodness, it totally spoke to me.
Oh, it spoke to you.
Yeah.
What did it say?
It said, we're very pleased to announce we've secured funding for our 2022 season. So you can look forward to another year with our skeleton deer friend and all of the other friends we've made along the way.
That's such a great secret.
Well, thank you everyone for helping us disenchant this object so that we could get that secret.
Until next time, don't forget to follow us on Twitter and on Facebook at Ephemera Series. We're the same everywhere. And please subscribe to this YouTube page. We'd like to thank the Toronto Arts Council, the Ontario Arts Council 2 times over now, and the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America for their funding assistance.
And as we close out tonight, we'd also like to thank our fabulous readers and storyteller, composer Alex White, our friends, families, loved ones, and you. Thank you for staying with us. We will see you next on September 15th, right here on YouTube.